Welcome to part 2 of the series where I try to make the background which makes this devlog number 5, because I'm going to try and make this series more confusing than the last series of Attack on Titan. Hello, my name is Allmatt Jazz and I've tasked myself to make a visual novel by myself. Today is episode number 5, so without further ado, let me show you what I've been working on. So, in the last devlog we worked upon the background. We drew the back alley street in which the story takes place, and in this episode we're going to be drawing the foreground elements, which is the ramen stall itself. For those of you who don't know, this visual novel takes place in a back alley at Ramen Stall. So what I did is I took out my trusty sketchbook and started drawing out a few ideas. I actually used the outline of my bank card that I had as kind of the basis to actually have it as a frame to actually start doing the sketching for the foreground. So we had things like bowls, different lights, we've got awnings of what would actually be there, little details that we can put, things on the walls either side, little details that I can actually add to the final background itself. And then there was one I was kind of happy with. It was this one here with kind of a few condiments and chopsticks at the side, as well as like a few bowls, a few decorations either side, a lamp at the top, and also flags running side by side. I didn't want to make it specific to a local area like Japan or something like that, because it kind of localizes it to one specific spot. So I did want it to kind of look vaguely generic in a way. And then the lamp itself actually adds a bit more dimension. So here I am doing like a rough sketch of kind of what I want it to look like in the actual final background, transferring it from the paper rough sketch that I've got into an actual digital rough sketch on top. I'm using Clip Studio Paint for this, for those of you who aren't sure what I'm using here. And the brushes are actually really smooth and really nice to get those nice crisp clean lines, which is kind of my style. And then it got to a point where I couldn't get the geometry quite right, especially with stuff like sizes and things like the bowls, for instance. So I actually turned to what makes Clip Studio Paint pretty cool, and that's the asset store. These assets usually can be brought in the 3D environments and then can be placed in your 2D digital scenes. So I found a few things here. I found this bowl, which in Clip Studio Paint I was able to stack on top of one another and then use that as my reference to then outline the bowls themselves, rather than trying to do it by eye and then the scale ends up all wonky and a bit jarring. I also did this for the lamp at the top as well. This made sure that everything was nice and centered. And then when it came to all the condiments and the chopsticks on the right hand side, I actually ended up going to Google and getting a few images and then bringing them in. Things like the sriracha bottle, the soy sauce bottle, the salt and pepper shakers, things that would probably be roundabout in the ramen stall itself. And then after the sketching was done, I had something that looked like this. And then I used this as the base to start outlining the whole thing, making sure that the clean line art is in there, taking my time to make sure that all the details start to come to life. And then I also made sure to use the straight line tool to make sure that the frame of the ramen stall itself is nice and centered and clean. I basically want to box this whole background in, enclosing the whole space, and like I said before, almost having a frame for where the characters are actually going to live and interact with each other. And then after all that was outlined, I had something that looked like this. So this is it just by itself, and then this is it overlaid on top of the background. And then it was onto colour. Now the background was predominantly blue. I know I had the windows at the back that were predominantly orange, but the background itself was predominantly blue. There's a reason for this. Mainly because the ramen stall itself is quite brown. It's obviously made out of wood, so it's going to be using a lot of browns. So for this I want to make sure to avoid blue as much as possible. This would give a massive distinction between what's behind the ramen stall itself and the ramen stall. So I'm just blocking in some rough colours, choosing different browns for the sides and the paneling, and then using the reference images almost like a guide to make sure that I'm getting the colours right. And then what happened with the colouring is I had this little picture frame on the left hand side, so I took my inner Bob Ross and created a little Alp scene almost. This ended up almost being like a type to practice on, but it actually turned out really well, so it ended up staying in the final background. And then once all the colours were down, I had something that looked like this. This is it without the background, and then this is it with the background. Something a bit more solid now, and you can start seeing it all come together. And then it was time for shading. I took a shading technique that I actually learned from Starfish Face. Go watch a video of how she colours in. It's really good. I'll link it down in the description as well, as I can see if I can put it on the screen at the moment. She uses Clip Studio Paint as well, and I've been looking for a good shading and highlighting tutorial, so I definitely recommend you go check her out. And I started adding the shading. Usually things like under the bowls, where the bowls are touching the walls. Almost using the lamp in the middle as a rough guide of where to put the shadows. As further down the line, when I start adding the lighting effects, these shadows will make more sense as it's in relation to that one light source, the lamp in the middle of that scene. So here I am using like a light purple colour and multiply on a layer to add all the shadows to where I think they can go. So then I wanted to add some texture to the wood itself just to make it not look so smooth. So I took some wood grain textures that I found online, placed them over, and then Use that as a guide to roughly add some lines to act as wood grain. I did this on the floor, the walls and the ceiling to establish it as being made out of wood. And then after all that, I ended up with something that looks like this. This is it without the background, and then this is it with the background. And we can definitely see that it's starting to come together now. The final step were the highlights, which is probably the quickest part of this whole background section, which is basically doing the opposite of the shading, so I already know where they need to land. And then what I did is I added highlights to each one of the corners of the actual boxed frame itself, just to make sure that the actual colours aren't so flat. I know I added wood grain and stuff in between the panels and the walls and the floor and stuff, but just those little pockets of where the light catches in the corners stops it from being one flat colour throughout the entire background. And after all was said and done, the final background looked like this. This is it without the background that I originally had from part 1, and then this right here is going to be the final background. Now obviously, like I said, further down the line we're going to be adding effects, so this is what I'm kind of going for, the kind of subtle blur to give that depth of field, as well as a little bit of darkness, just to see that it's actually nighttime further on in the back. And that's pretty much it for the background. Later on there's going to be things added to it, like blurs and all that kind of stuff further down the line when we actually put this game together. But for now, that's it for the background. So next episode we're going to be working on characters. We're going to make the profiles for them and basically show you what characters are going to be in this game and how they're going to interact. So without further ado, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.